following Ram Dass recording was made October 4th, 1982.
This question and answer session took place at a Dying into Life retreat in Leesburg, Florida. Some of the questions were not audible on the original recording and will therefore be dubbed onto this tape.
I'd actually like to work with questions and answers, but I guess I'm going to say something first. I don't trust me as far as I can throw me. I guess I want to make very clear what our business is. I really mean our business on Earth, not our business together. Whatever happened to me in the 60s it really started a process it opened up a process that goes on and on and on and on. A process in which the meaning of daily events has changed. The meaning of my physical, psychological existence has changed. And I really saw myself go from wanting more pleasure, more gratification, more like I have a right to, that one. I've suffered a lot. Look what my parents did. I have a right. I'm going to go through therapy so I can get more pleasure out of life. To tasting of a kind of a freedom, a tasting of a being part of everything. That made whether I got pleasure or not much less the critical issue. I mean, I used to talk a lot about, you know that expression, one to me is loss and gain, one to me is fame and shame, one to me is pleasure and pain. Now that is what somebody who is on the spiritual journey could say and understand. But look at your own life and how hard it is to hear that one. One to me is loss and gain. And having grown up in a Jewish middle-class background, that one seemed absolutely absurd. One to me is loss and gain. I mean, I could tell the difference between loss and gain without any trouble at all. You know? And almost in spite of myself, that has happened. That when things get financially better and more stable and things get more beautiful and I have more of everything and I have more success and more everything, And when I started to lose it all, like a few years ago, I came back from India, maybe 5, 6 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I came back from India. And I was walking through, I've talked about this, I was walking through Harvard Square. Now in the 60s when I'd walk through Harvard Square, I was like a phenomenon. Everybody would, Ramda or Dick Alpert or, because of my history. And I was a lot of attention and so on. I walked through Harvard Square for 3 hours and nobody said hello. Nobody recognized me, and I was like standing around looking, and I was like, and I thought, well, easy come, easy go. It's an anachronism, it's gone, that's all, that one's gone. That's what that was about. And when that happened, at first I felt, oh, and then I felt this release of, okay, now what? There was this incredible adventure possible. It was like when I got thrown out of Harvard. I mean, I was a bad guy. I'd been thrown out of the establishment, and I really assumed that I had lost. I mean, that's what you did. You worked your whole life to get legitimacy, and then suddenly it's just been taken away publicly on the front page of the New York Times. I mean, it's not like it's a secret little thing that you can go somewhere else. There it is. You're that one that did that. I mean, even as bad as Tim Leary is, I was the one that got thrown out. He didn't get thrown out. His contract ran out. I was the one that got thrown out. So, and I remember the press conference there, as all the reporters and all the television people were interviewing me, and they were looking at me as this was the last time I was going to appear anywhere. It's a fighter that's just lost, and he's a little old, and he's going to be sweeping gyms from now on. It's that kind of guy, and it's the last interview for somebody who's over the hill. Muhammad Ali, you're not going to fight again, baby. It's all over. Go write poetry. And inside, and I wasn't on any drugs that day, inside I felt this incredible, this strange sense of freedom, because all of my life I had been so afraid of not being what everybody expected me to be. And now I had publicly not been what everybody expected. My parents were sitting Shiva. I mean, the whole thing was done. I had blown it. That means, for those of you that are not initiates into Sanskrit practices, that's a funeral process the parents do after somebody's died. I mean, I had died as a member of the community, really. And inside, it felt like I was free for the first time since I was a tiny child. And I thought to myself, fame and shame, isn't that interesting? One to me is fame and shame. And I thought, did I just blow it, or did I just win? What's happened here? And I've seen more and more that these things are so external, fame and shame and loss and gain. I've sat in India in conditions that I, as a well-toilet-trained Bostonian, would be aghast at. I mean, I have sat in a railway station where the train's going to be 2 days late, and I've run out of money. I've got terrible dysentery. I'm barefoot because I'm a sadhu. The toilets are just these outside latrines, holes in the ground in cement places where the hole got filled about a year ago, so people have just shit all over the cement, so you got to walk among the shit to find a place to go. Flies, millions of flies everywhere. You're drinking watery tea out of a cracked cup that's dripping on your dhoti. There are chickens and goats and babies peeing and everything all over the floor. I mean, And you're just in that scene for 2 days, and you think, oh my God, what is this about? I mean, how do I find myself in this life, in this situation? And in the midst of it, I looked and I thought, could this be that I am content? I mean, could I conceivably be content in this condition? Is that possible? There must be something wrong with me. Do you understand? My mind wouldn't allow the possibility that I could actually be content in that situation. That's something that I would have complained bitterly about. You know, I go traveling with my father and my stepmother. And they're really pretty groovy, but we're with other people, and I watch how they can take something that is absolutely quite beautiful and make it into a living hell. I remember going years ago, going on a ship from San Francisco to Hawaii, the Lurline. And I had a deck chair that had on one side of it the smokestack from the kitchen with the smell of grease coming by my nose. The other side, my father with a cigar. And it was almost impossible to get a smell of the ocean if I sat in my deck chair, because it was constantly either grease or cigar smoke going by my face. And I remember how I was busy having it destroy my whole trip. And I remember just ruining the whole trip with complaints about this and that, about who was at our table, about the fact that my tuxedo had a stain nobody could see, but I knew about it. How sexually frustrated I was. How would I escape from my parents? All of these things that my mind was full of. And I think, gee, when people say, have you changed at all? I think, boy, have I changed. Because how much I can take any situation now and open to it and say, yeah, okay. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't enjoy softness, and I won't enjoy love, and I won't enjoy cleanliness, and I won't enjoy luxury. But enjoying it and needing it for one's happiness are two entirely different things. And there is a tremendous shift in perception of what life is about when you can create as beautiful a life as you can, and then take what comes down the mill, comes down the road, and work with it joyfully, even when it's heavy and negative stuff. A few years ago, a very scathing article was done about me in the New York Times. And it was done by somebody who was very angry because his wife had become very spiritual, and he felt he was losing her, and he was very threatened, and it was a whole scene about it underneath. And there I was, really out there. I was on the cover of the magazine section, Confessions of an American Guru, and then all this kind of stuff of expose about my sexual life with my teacher Joya and so on. And I remember feeling how I should be feeling a certain way about this, but I wasn't feeling it. It's again and again that my old habits of perception lead me to expect that I'm going to feel a certain way when something happens, and then I don't feel that. And it's a constant, wow, my God, I really have changed. And I think that you will see when you start on this journey that changes occur, but your models of who you are lag behind. And you keep being surprised that you have indeed changed. That something that should have driven you up the wall no longer, okay, if I can't do anything about it, that's the way it is. It's as if, like, when my car, Soma Krishna and I were driving back from Lama in her, she has an Odyssey camper, and we were driving across the country in it, and it broke down. And you have a plan, you're going to get to so-and-so at a certain time, and then the camper breaks down. So there's, oh God, the carburetor's going. And so I had to get out and thumb. And the result was that I was picked up by a traveling salesman who had a bottle of vodka under the seat, And he had one of these radios, CB radios, and he was talking to truck drivers about all these sexual things with truck drivers, about women that they ought to stop and look at on the way. I mean, it was the most... It was... And all I could do, I just kept opening to it, and then we started to talk, and before long, he was just opening like a flower, and it was... He ended up, he wanted to drive me here and there, and there was just this beautiful, beautiful contact. Like I drive an MG, and my MG, I'm a very conservative person, but my MG is only happy when it's going about 83 miles an hour. So it gets tickets every day. I mean, I don't get tickets; it gets tickets. You understand? I'm very conservative, but. So I explained to the state troopers, I say, would you ticket the car, not me? I'm a very conservative person, but it insists it's only happy when you can hear the engine just sort of settle in at 83. So I end up sitting each day. I mean, when I'm traveling, it's one ticket a day. I have to build it into my budget. And I end up sitting in the car with a state trooper every day, and... Now, most people, when they get a ticket, their adrenaline pumps and they feel guilty and angry and frustrated and all. And I just, ticket time, and I get out and I get into the car with a state trooper and I just start to talk to them. And, down in Arizona, I met a beautiful American Indian state trooper, and I knew the chief of his tribe, and we ended up having a lovely talk. And I don't come on. I expect to get the ticket. I don't want him to. I'm not trying to get him not to give me the ticket. That's his business. He's doing his thing. I'm doing my thing. And there's a quality in which my life has changed. Can you see? Just take a ticket, for example. Most people would get a ticket and it would ruin their whole day. Most people. Now that's most middle-class American people. That's what would happen to them. They would end up with guilt that they would have, and anger and frustration at the system, and thinking of what they could have done with the money and so on. Now, I don't love getting tickets. I'm not asking for them, but here they are. Okay, now you work with it. You work with it. And you open to it. And that is a different quality of life. And that quality of life comes from seeing that the meaning of your life is other than pleasure or fame or gain or getting more of everything. As long as that's the meaning of your life, you're constantly counting, judging, complaining because it's never enough. And the minute there is this sense of my life is a vehicle for awakening, I can become free, the minute there is a spiritual or consciousness context for your life, then the pleasure and the pain and all of the stuff, the suffering, becomes entirely different in its value and meaning to you. And I can sit with jealousy and loneliness, just the kind of human feelings everybody else has. Be in a lousy relationship and be jealous and be in pain, and at the same moment there is a quality of spaciousness just around the edges. It says, boy, this one's really got me this time. See? And I'm both lost in it and not lost in it at the same moment. And if I grab at the not lost and try to push away the pain, it's got me. But if I try to say the pain is all there is, it's not real either. Can you hear what I'm talking about at all? Because
The question to Ram Dass is, throughout the whole workshop we've been hearing about your life. It seems easier for you to adopt these attitudes in your life in view of who you are and how easy it is for you to make money than it is for most of us. I'd like you to address this issue for those of us who have been and are experiencing economic hardships.
I appreciate that issue. I don't always have that money. I mean, I don't get money from anybody but what I earn. So, but it is easy for me to earn money. But I think that the most profound teachings about the quality of being able to be with what is came to me from living in the village in India that I live in. And I lived there with people who had, in Yiddish it says bobkis, they had nothing but nothing but nothing. I mean, if they got one hot meal a day, they were doing damn well. And yet the quality of light in those beings and the quality of spacious awareness with their life just blew me away. And I saw that we can be poor even when we're rich. And that poverty is so much part of the mind. Each day you got to do what you got to do. You've either got to work, like I deal a lot with people who work, say, in a factory every day, so many hours a day. Now, I don't have to work an 8-hour shift. And I realize that that's, they got to do a repetitive job. And we talk, and I watch people, just like the people I work with in prisons, who have absolutely crummy lives from an economic point of view. And some of them go under with the preoccupation of self-pity and anger because they're constantly comparing themselves to someone else. And other people are taking that situation and opening to it, and they end up being fed by the situation even as they're going through shit, really. And I see them getting more out of it than somebody who's got, a Jaguar to get into and money in the bank and so on. So I really feel, I hear the issue. It's what you have to do with your time, but it isn't what you have to do with your consciousness. And the preoccupation with standard of living, other than beyond survival, is a matter of mind. It really is a matter of mind, not of they say that until you get a certain security, it's hard to do inner work. But that means enough food to keep from dying. That's really first chakra type stuff we're talking about. We're not talking about a comfortable room. We're just talking about enough shelter so you don't freeze to death. Right? Beyond that, it's the game of mind from then on. And am I addressing the issue at all? Yeah. Of course it is. So you end up doing with less and eating the same food and doing a lot of stuff where then the question is how much your mind is focused on what you don't have. I mean, if you've got to eat beans and grains and very few vegetables and a little fruit and stuff like that repetitively every day, and you can't have variety and so on, the question is whether you see that as deprivation or not. It's interesting, when I came back from India in '68, I went into the cabin behind my father's house, and my father had this big estate, and I lived in this little cabin, and I would cook my own food every day. And I would cook the same food every day, which was lentils and rice, and I made my chapatis with flour and water, and I was going to live as a yogi, right? And I bathed out of a bucket, which is what I had been doing in India. And I was sitting there, and there, 100 feet away, was this huge house with smells of roast beef pouring out of it, and I could hear the television and music playing out over his golf course, and I was sitting there cooking my little pot of kejri and feeling very righteous. Oh, was I righteous? Oh, boy. I mean, yeah. And then I saw how much I was preoccupied with those issues, that I was doing just the reverse twist of that whole game, and that that if we're going to be free, we're going to be free about the preoccupations with our worldly conditions. It doesn't mean we won't notice them. It doesn't mean we won't try to optimize them. But the question is how much emotional attached mind you invest in optimizing them. You can drive down the road in one car. Like I remember I was hanging out in the drug days in the 60s. I was living on an estate that was owned by the Mellon family. Now, the Mellon family is collectively one of the wealthiest families in this country. Mummy in that particular family had $700 million. And Billy, one of the twin boys, 22 years old, he only had 20 million. And I was teaching him how to fly. And we landed at LaGuardia in his plane, which was about a $40,000 plane. And we went over to Butler Aviation to leave the plane at the landing dock. We pulled in, and he got this terribly sad face. I said, "What's the trouble?" He said, "Look." And he pointed over at this huge, big private jet. He says, "That's Uncle Paul's. I really wish I could have one of those." See? And here was a guy that had 20 million and a $40,000 plane, and he was miserable because he couldn't have Uncle Paul's $2.5 million jet. Right? And I saw how it's insatiable. The thing is insatiable. There's no end to that game. There's no end. And the question is, what is it you do with your time each day? Is it more noble to spend your time water skiing than it is to spend your time digging a ditch? Is it more noble? I mean, is what you do with the time as important as how you do what you do with the time? And if you have to spend 12 hours just to earn enough for food and for shelter, is that time different from a spiritual consciousness point of view than time if you spent going swimming and motorboating or whatever pleasures you would do? It's interesting because it's just a set of experiences from a spiritual point of view, and every one of those experiences will catch you in it or not catch you in it. Now, I'm not minimizing that it's a drag to be poor and to have to hassle all the time. But how much your mind gets caught in that is that's the spiritual work. It's the spiritual work.
The question to Ram Dass is there a linear progression of getting clear about certain issues and situations, or is there some powerful intervention that takes place for this to happen?
Now, what there is there's a shift in context or in perceptual frame of reference, framework. And then what happens is you then just run old parts of your life through. It's like running old tapes and bringing them up to date. It's like I had a relationship with my mother that was extremely intense and very heavy duty. I was a Freudian therapist, so I know, okay? And it was one of those kind you never surface from, ever. And she was really good at her game, and I was good at mine, and we were really a neurotic dyad of the most intensely delicious quality of psychosexual horror. And I went through analysis, and I held all this. I was busy living with this relationship as years went by, and I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. When I was in India, and my guru, as many of you know who read Be Here Now or of any of these things, my guru, the vehicle through which he really opened my heart was using the powers of his mind to remember, to describe to me the organ that killed my mother, right? Which is very bizarre from a psychological point of view, that an Eastern guru will say the word spleen to me, and it opens my heart, all right, the organ from which my mother died. And the next day he said to me, "Your mother is a very high being." And I said to the translator, "Isn't that an error in translation? Didn't he say she was a very high being?" And he said, "No." He asked Maharaji, "Nay, is a very high being." She had been dead 6 months. And at that moment, something flipped. And I suddenly saw my mother as this spiritual entity who had taken birth as a Jewish middle-class woman in Boston, who did her job with great gusto, right? But I suddenly saw those few moments in our life when we had broken through the veil, and we knew it wasn't the way we were living it out. But those you could count on one hand, those moments when we broke out, when we came up for air. But suddenly that was real and all the rest of it was a dream. And the result was that a lot of the stuff that was holding in that started to release. It hasn't all released, but it certainly started to release. So what I'm experiencing is that there is a kind of a continuous progression of increasing non-attachment or non-clinging of mind. And then you have a lot of old karmic trips hanging inside you. And that sometimes you got to wait for a situation to awaken them, to bring them up to date. And sometimes, like when I first, in 1968, when I sat in the temple in India, I was there for about 3 or 4 months, really just all alone most of the time, just drinking tea, trying to keep warm, sitting by the river. And I hadn't really been in that kind of space for a long time. And I found that I was running old memories of life through, and that they were changing before my eyes because I was bringing them up to the present moment. And it seems to me that's constantly what we're doing. We're rerunning stuff and bringing it back in, bringing it back in, bringing it back in. You might have tremendous anger towards somebody in your family. And then from a new place of consciousness, when the anger comes up again, you see, there's anger. Instead of climbing into it, being so reactive each time. It changes slowly. So I don't think it's not critical moments that much. It's a continuous process. Am I dealing with your question at all? It is a progression. It is a progression because just because you've awakened and you have embraced a spiritual model, partly with your intellect and partly with your gut, there is still old karma to run off. I remember coming to my meditation teacher in Bodh Gaya, Manindra, and saying to him that I was very angry. And he said, "It's just old karma. Don't make such a big deal of it. Just meditate. It'll run away." And you feel that a lot of stuff, there's an inertia in stuff that doesn't go away. It doesn't all happen just like that, no. Yeah.
The question to Ram Dass is, I find working with patients at the hospital very physically and mentally demanding. Often at the end of the day, I find myself feeling so spent that I'm literally on my hands and knees. How can you give it out and take it in at the same time?
By getting beyond giving and receiving. Okay? See, the reason you're spent is because, first of all, you're busy giving, and then you are very attached to the fruits of your actions. That they appreciate it and that they change from... I understand, and that's why you're burning out, my love. Now, let's just look at an option. Okay? This is the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, and it raises some interesting questions. It says, be not attached to being the actor, meaning being the doer, and be not attached to the fruits of the action. Now, why would you do it? You would do it because that's what you do. You are a masseuse or a healer or a therapist or whatever because that's the part you play. And you do it dharmically. You do it in a way that is with full presence and do it beautifully. It is being done, and all the time you are continually bringing yourself back into a quiet space of not identifying with being the doer. So the thing is happening, but you're more and more sitting at rest all day long. And whether or not your healing works is an issue between God and the being. You don't know what's supposed to happen to them. How presumptuous of you to think that your efforts are to bring about a certain result. I speak here. Each of you gets what you need to get. How presumptuous of me to decide what you need to get. Somebody gets up and walks out in disgust. Should I feel shaken? Or should I say, well, that person needed to do that? Is my job to make everybody here happy? Or everybody love me? Or everybody think this is wonderful? Or everybody buy my cup of what I'm selling? No. I don't know. Maybe the thing that person needed most was to be able to say, that guy's an asshole, and walk out. I really don't know. I don't know, and I don't have to know. I merely have to do what I do as purely as I can do it. If you can flip consciousness just that little bit so that you do the thing and you just enjoy the purity with which you do your act, and you start to rest in your being as you're doing it, there's no burnout. You end up at the end of the day with more energy than you start the day with. It's your identification with your actions and your attachments to the effects of the actions that are what are destroying you, not the act itself. If you can hear that one, it's a big one, because it's changed my whole life. It's absolutely turned me around completely, because I used to drag myself back from stuff. Because everybody, I kept saying, they want so much. And I would go in and I'd fall against the door and say, oh my God, I can't go on with this. And then I began to see it was my own trip. It was my own need to be good. It was my own need to be loved. It was my own need to be long-suffering that was doing me in. It had nothing to do with the action itself. If you can understand what I'm talking about, you start a process of making contact with and starting to identify that part of yourself that has nothing to do with the drama of your actions. You start to make contact with the place. You're asking a question and I'm answering it. Behind the asking and the answering, you're here, I'm here. See, we both see asking and answering. And we're not better or worse or anything, we're just right here. That part of me I'm sitting in right now as I'm answering. So I'm not, even though the answer is happening, I'm not busy answering. I'm not an answerer at this moment. I am a being who is answering. Exactly, you're not an asker. You're a being who's asking. Now, if you're fully identified with being the asker, you're doing the same thing you do at work. See, now what you do is you start to play with it. And what you do is, like, you could keep a diary. And every night, you write down all the times you lost your consciousness into your drama. You see what it is that caught you each time. And then pretty soon you're able to, like, take a few minutes between people, a minute or two, to go into the bathroom or something and sit down and just do whatever it is that can reconnect you with that place in yourself behind the drama of your daily life. For some, it's a mantra. For some, it's calling on God. For some, it's just following your breath for a moment. You may need to deepen those methods that allow you to center, it's called, to come to the place behind all of the comings and goings of your life. And that's what you begin. You begin to spend time, instead of going home and saying, I'm so tired I can only look at television. You go home and you sit and you just sit with the sunset and you quiet down until you connect with a more vast part of yourself. Or you read a paragraph in the morning from Ramakrishna or Ramana Maharshi or some book, some holy book, that just reconnects you with something much more vast than the game. And this is a slow process. This is the process of these methods of coming into the spirit. That's what this whole game is about. But it's not something that happens just like that. You forget and you get lost. But see, the interesting question is when you say, I'm going to go back to, do you go back to? Or to the extent that you just heard what I'm saying to you now, and you really grok it, you really hear it and feel it, is there any going back? You'll go into a new situation now that has in it this. Okay? And then you'll lose it, then you'll get it, then you'll lose it, then you'll get it, then you'll lose it, and pretty soon you won't be able to lose it fully. It starts to just happen just like that. It's a very slow process.
The question to Ram Dass is, in thinking about right attitude and action, a very dear friend who's a practicing lawyer comes to mind. Are there certain occupations as opposed to others which are more compatible to leading a spiritual life?
Well, I think that the right livelihood and doing actions which hurt others, I think that you accept. I think that probably there are some very edgy occupations that are really close to the edge, like maybe making bullets or something like that, which by nature have in it the intent to hurt people. But for the most part, like somebody came to me and they make television sets. I say, well, television sets can liberate people as well as hurt them. There's no reason why it has to hurt somebody, and bullets can protect people as well as killing them. I mean, I'm not trying to cop out, but I think that it is the nature of the quality of his being that will determine whether his interaction with his clients, with the judges, with the opponents, whether his litigation is going to hurt or not. Because as an instrument of a set of social structures to preserve people who have greed and lust and fear, which would make them hurt each other, as an instrument of a legal system, he can be a very dharmic lawyer. There are lawyers who are very much acting in ways, even in litigating in a very aggressive way, they can still have a quality of their being that has deep compassion in it. I don't think any business, any form has in it inherently no spirit or the spirit. There are plenty of ministers that are the worst hustlers in the world, and there are plenty of prison guards that are extremely compassionate men that are playing a part in a system. And since the system exists, they may not agree to the system, but if they are playing their part, they play it in such a way that helps liberate people. So I think you have to stretch beyond seeing that the form is what the game is about. It isn't the form. It's the nature of the beings that fill the form. It's a big one.